Let's call the meeting to order. We have Eric, you have a flag?
I do.
And I'm going to ask Mr. Labrie, please, to lead us in the pledge when the flag gets up.
Oh, sorry.
Gilbert, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm waiting for the flag.
Yeah, I did go over this earlier and sorry. Share screen.
Is this all right?
There it is, Eric.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Perfect. All right.
All right.
Good. All right, Gilbert.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry about that. It went from the flag to
Thank
a really
you, Gilbert.
cute cat.
We'll get this ironed out.
So,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, would you
Eric,
like
are
me
you-
to run through who is present, which of our committee members are present on the meeting?
Yes,
Should
please.
I,
Yes,
should I do
please.
that? So in lieu of a roll call, let me just indicate who is present. Our
Yes.
chair, Mark Pruner, representing the Delta General Public. I don't believe Vice Chair Barbara Daly has yet joined, but if she has, please chime in. Gilbert Labrie.
Barbara can't.
Okay. Gilbert Labrie representing Delta Business. Lindsay Liebig representing Delta Agriculture. Kathy Button and Todd Bruce, both representing Delta Recreation. Chris Elias, representing a Delta Flood entity. Mariah Looney, representing a Delta organization. Jim Starr is not attending, but in his stead, Gina Van Klompenberg with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, representing a state agency. And also Eddie Hard, representing a state agency. Craig Watanabe and Jim Cox, representing Delta Habitat and Conservation non-governmental organizations. And Russ Ryan, representing Delta Water Exporters. And in addition, Douglas Shaw, is an ex officio member representing Delta Cultural Preservation organizations. And then we have a number of ex officio members on the call, including from Mario Manzo from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, Daniel Welsh from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Robin Kroc from the Delta Conservancy, and Jeff Henderson from the Delta Stewardship Council. Are there any other committee members? I see someone joined with a 408 number. Maybe that's Chris Elias, but if not, if there are any other committee members that I did not just go through and mention, can you identify yourself at this point? Just committee members, not members of the public.
Every 4 years.
And a reminder for everyone to mute their phones, please. Unless you're talking. Thank you.
And can we know who the 408 number is so we can rename you for the meeting?
Yeah, that would be helpful. Whoever just joined by phone.
If
Okay,
you call in,
Does
you
that
have
person
yourself
hear us
muted.
408?
Yeah.
Your numbers.
that's
They're
okay.
muted. Mhm.
I think it's Chris Elias, but
We have a
anyway.
Chris Elias already in the meeting.
Yeah, I think he's double joining.
Oh, I
So
see.
anyway, Mr. Chair, we have more than a quorum, so back to you.
Yeah, the 408 is.
All right,
for-
let's proceed.
Thank you.
All right, hi, Chris. All right, so first, everybody had the agenda, hopefully was sent around last night, along with a couple of handouts for items lower down on the agenda. The first item of business is election of DPAC chair and vice chair for calendar 2021. This is pursuant to our charter, which has us elect our officers first meeting of each of each calendar year. The floor is now open for nominations for chair. And then once chair is elected, we'll move on to nominations for vice chair. Unless, somebody wants to nominate 2 people as a slate, that's certainly okay.
This is Russ. Mark, I want to.
Any nominations for chair? Hi, Russ.
Yeah. This is Russ. Mark, you've done a superb job in 2020, and I want to nominate you for 2021 for chair.
I second that.
All right. Thank you, Russ. That was not a plant. All right. Are there any other nominations? Going once, going twice. This is a really fun job. Going 3 times. Thank you, Russ. And thank you, Kathy. So we have to have an election now. All in favor, I'll just say ayes, nays, and abstentions. So all in favor, please say aye.
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 You have to unmute yourself. I'm sorry. Any nays? Please signify by unmuting yourself and saying nay. No nays. Any abstentions? Same process. I'm going to say the ayes have it, although I have a bunch of red mics off on my screen. Thank you. I think we have an election. The voting is still a little awkward on this system. Nominations are now open for vice chair. Barbara Daly currently sits in that seat. I talked to her today. She's willing to serve for this coming calendar year. Is there a nomination for vice chair?
Okay,
Well,
I'll
I'll move this
nominate.
along. So I'll nominate Barbara.
I'll
Okay, go ahead.
nominate Barbara for vice chair.
Very good. Nomination by Russ. Doesn't need a second. Are there any other nominations? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Nominations are closed. All in favor of Barbara as vice chair, please unmute yourself and say aye.
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 Very good. Any nays? Please unmute yourself and say nay or no. Any abstentions? Same process. I'm going to say the ayes have it. All right, very good. Thank you, guys. We got done with that. Let's go. Item number 3, which is a really important item. Eric, before we dive into the meat of the agenda, I just want to ask if you could, so that the committee at the beginning, toward the beginning of our meeting, has a somewhat of an idea what you think might be on the agenda for the upcoming commission meeting. Are you able to indicate for us what items might be on the agenda?
Yeah, our commission meets on January 21st. Just as a reminder to everyone, we have a new chair. As of next Monday, Supervisor Don Natoli will be the incoming chair of the Delta Protection Commission, and he'll be chairing the meeting on the 21st. We'll have a similar presentation to what's on your agenda today, the Delta Adapts Climate Adaptation Project from the Stewardship Council. We'll have that presentation. We'll ask for approval of our 2020 annual report as designated in our statute, or as mandated in our statute. I'll report to the commission on a whole host of items, including recent activities related to Delta Conveyance, and that will include the community benefits program that we'll be talking about here in a moment. And then I'll give a report to the commission on the work we're doing in reviewing the commission strategic plan. Vision 2030 is the name of that. And we had a chance to visit with the advisory committee about that at our last meeting. So I want to bring the commission up to date on the additional work that we have done on that. Those are the main items at this point. Oh, the final one will be the economic sustainability plan, the recreation and tourism chapter. We want to dig a little deeper in with the commission on the specific recommendation for how we ensure that we advance improvements in the Delta recreation and tourism economy as have been outlined in the consultant's report. And that could be accomplished through a number of different means, but we'll talk with our commission about how to advance those items as identified, excuse me, in the recreation and tourism chapter update of the economic sustainability plan. So those will be the items on the agenda on January 21st.
All right, thank you very much, Eric. And I think what I'm going to try to do in future meetings is actually put that in writing, because I think it's helpful for us to have in front of us at least an estimated or preliminary agenda for the DPC, so we can have that in mind as we conduct our work and try to advise the commission in the best possible way for the coming meeting. Thank you, Eric. Item 3, Janet, you're still there, right? I don't see you on my screen, but I assume you are.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Perfecto. Can you kind of take us through what you got? Yes, we can. We got your report.
Okay.
Take it away.
Okay. So let me share my screen. It'll just take me a second to get there. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see that. I'm going to make it, let's see if I can make it a slideshow. Okay. How's that? Okay. So, this is a similar presentation, but much shorter than the one that I did to the DCA's Stakeholder Engagement Committee meeting in December. I know several of you sit on that committee. Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
Can you put your connection before you dive in, if you don't mind?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sorry, I should have done that. So I'm Janet Barbieri. I'm a consultant to the Department of Water Resources. I have worked on water supply issues in the state in the Western US for about 25 years. I've been, gosh, if I say it like that, it sounds awful, but to my own ears. I've been on this project starting with the BDCP for a very long time. I think I started in about 2007. And I am a communications consultant. I help with public participation for public agencies in all manner of resources areas. So that's a little bit about who I am. And my role on the project currently is I manage all of the communications. And so we have a pretty robust team, and it's my job to kind of herd all those cats, and then obviously the community benefits program fits into that. So that's why I'm doing this presentation. So we did give a presentation to the Stakeholder Engagement Committee in December. I know some of you sit on that committee, and probably others of you watched that presentation. So I thought I didn't want to do that whole big thing again, but I did pull just a few slides from that I thought would be helpful. And as Mark just mentioned, Eric did send out there's what we're calling a concept paper. It's a 3-page concept paper that sort of describes how we're thinking about community benefits right now. But I guess I would just like to start off by saying that it is conceptual at this point in time. We had to start somewhere. So we thought it would be important to just, not start with a blank piece of paper, but, put some thoughts together conceptually and use that as a place to start talking to the community. So that's what this is. And that's what that paper represents. So just briefly, I'll go through a couple of slides and then we can reserve the bulk of the time for questions or conversation or however you want to handle that, Mark. But in terms of defining a community benefits program, there's a lot of ways to look at it. There's a lot of different examples out there in the country and in the world. But generally, it's a defined set of commitments that are made by project proponents, but are created in coordination with the local community. And the idea is, there's permit conditions, there's mitigation that comes out of CEQA or NEPA, and that's not this. This is really something that's in its own category. And it's intended to, be pretty wide ranging, but really based on input from the community. And I would say grassroots input from the community. And it is a demonstration on the project proponent's part to demonstrate that there's an acknowledgement that there are adverse effects to communities that they can endure through construction, especially a major capital works project. And this is a way to sort of get to some of those concerns. In terms of why to pursue a community benefits program, again, large infrastructure projects like this project inevitably create effects in the communities and the local environment in which they're built. And I think it's important to note that that the project is really cognizant of the fact that the project will be built and working in a local community, but the project is really designed around creating benefits specific to the State Water Project and State Water Project deliveries, which are elsewhere, not in the Delta. And so there's a disconnect there. And this is an attempt to, through the community benefits program, to acknowledge that and to try to bring some benefit to the local community. But again, it's not the project proponent's job to say, well, here, we're going to bequeath you with these things. I mean, that would just be so irrational and embarrassing and inappropriate. It's better to, at least we're hoping that people agree with us, that it's better to try to work with the local community and say, is there a place for community benefits program? What do you think about it? How would you define it? How would you organize it, et cetera? So that's generally the intent here. Some objectives that we put together, again, the community might feel differently, but these are objectives that we started with. One is to provide a mechanism for the Delta community to identify opportunities for local benefits. The second one is a mechanism for the project proponents to demonstrate good faith, transparency, accountability to the community. And then the third is, potentially support project consistency with the Delta plan. And there's a couple of different categories, at least the way we've been thinking about it right now, again, because it's kept conceptual, this could change, but there's really two things. One was a thought about a fund. Could we put together, based on grassroots input, a framework for a fund that would focus on projects that, and these are words that I know are familiar to you, and we did that on purpose, but there might be other words that the community would want to use, but projects that would help protect, enhance, and sustain the cultural, historical, recreational, agricultural, economic values of the Delta. Like we're cognizant that those are the things potentially that are important to members of the community. So is there a way that a fund as a part of a community benefits program could help in that regard? The other one on the right-hand side of the screen is more, if you're going to be building a project, the way you implement that project, there's decisions that you could make that could potentially bring benefit to the community. And we're thinking in terms of jobs or job training, labor agreements, prioritizing construction partners. Actually my connection is unstable.
Yeah, Janet, you're coming through a little blotchy. Maybe if you turn off your video, that might help matters.
Yeah, I just tried that. So I
Okay.
live in a pretty rural area, and sometimes it's in and out. So I really apologize. So just flag me if that happens again.
Okay, you sound great right now. Thanks.
Okay, good. So the last bullet on there on the right-hand side is multi-purpose facilities. There's a lot of different ways to think about that. Sometimes people say leave behind, but it's the types of things that, you know, when you're building a big project like this, there are things that perhaps can be left behind or would be left behind. And could we repurpose those for community use? And there's any number of things that might fall into that category. This slide is important because it's just to clarify that there's some different buckets. The middle bucket is the thing we're talking about today, the community benefits program. There's also on the blue bucket is the mitigation side of things, and that is its own bucket. And so, you know, like for example, if you're talking about CEQA and mitigation that comes out from CEQA, that's over there in that bucket. We have also talked about some type of ombudsman program, and that also is sort of its own category of things. But the idea there is that we would obviously need a very robust program and a very streamlined program, one where it's very transparent, very easy to get to a human, it's very easy to get issues dealt with, that sort of thing. So I just wanted to clarify that there really are those three very distinct, but obviously related things. So our thought is that we would develop a framework about the community benefits program. And the framework would be an outline, if you will. I guess that's the best way to think about it. A very robust outline that would then go into the draft EIR. It would be an appendix to the draft EIR. And we wanted to do it that way to make it more real, to demonstrate that it really is a commitment. And so what we're thinking would go into the framework would be things like identifying the types of benefits, like the categories of benefits, the goals for those categories, principals, you know, tenants, stakeholders that would be involved in development, objectives, and process design just means how do you get from a framework to an actual program? Because we know that it's important to make sure that the process that you use, it works for everyone, and we want input on that process. So that will be an important piece of what goes into the framework. And then what we are planning on doing this year is starting with some interviews of community members that we sort of kick things off with the presentation to the Stakeholder Engagement Committee. But the idea is, I think, really January and February, focus on interviews within the community, and then use those interviews to design some public workshops that would be like April, May, or possibly March, April, May. And we would use the content, you know, the input that we get from the interviews and the workshops to develop the framework that would then go into the EIR. So that's the idea. And then just to be clear, once you have a framework, the framework is what you use to actually develop and build the program. And then once you've built the program, then you implement it. So this is, you know, this is a many-year endeavor. And then the last thing I wanted to just end on here was a slide about core commitments. And one is that we want a transparent process, an open process, so that, you know, we can really collaborate effectively. We want the process to be constructive. We want to work in good faith with the community. We want it to be inclusive and, you know, pretty diverse and broad stakeholder participation. The fourth item, it gets back to what I was saying before in terms of acknowledging where benefits from the project lie and hoping to be able to bring some benefit to the local community. And then the last one is also very important. I want to be very clear that we completely understand that any type of participation in a community benefit program doesn't signal support for the project and isn't dependent on support for the project. So I just want to make that really clear. So that's it for the presentation. I'd be happy, Mark, I don't know where you want to head here, if you want to do Q&A or if you want to just open for discussion, I'll stop there.
If you're speaking, Mr. Chair, you're muted. You're muted.
Sorry,
Mr. Chair.
I tell people that all the time, and sorry, let's do Q&A, Janet. Could I just ask a few questions first? Looking at slide 7, what is
Should I
your
bring it back
general
up?
estimate or best guess on the time frame? Yeah, let's do that. If you, for at least for my questions, I'm trying to be slide specific.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm sorry. Re-ask your question, Mark.
Yeah, I'm looking at the phases in the upper right-hand corner.
Okay.
And I'm thinking about the approach specifically on the right-hand side. So I know I'm not asking you to nail things down with certainty on a calendar here, but if you could talk about what time frame you envision for the steps, the 4 phases,
Yeah.
and the right-hand side of the slide.
Sure. So I'll start with that because that's easier. The interviews and public workshops we're really hoping to get done in the first half of the year because we want to be able to at least have the bulk of the framework, or I guess I would say draft of the framework done by mid-year. And that probably won't be all aspects of it, but we want to get as much done as we can. And then the remainder of the year work on the other pieces of it. And I think probably what we'll do is save like the process design stuff for later in the year, because that can be harder to do in terms of trying to figure out like how do we get from a framework to a program? What's the process look like? Does there need to be some sort of new group? How do you figure out where that group lives? You know, that kind of thing. It's important to get that right. In terms of the phases on the top right, so phase 1 and phase 2 is really this year and largely the first 6 months. I think phase 3 is the part where you're going from framework to program. And my suspicion is that something that could take probably a couple of years. But I think ideally, I think there is probably a desire to have that done before going to the Delta Stewardship Council with the consistency determination, but I'm not positive about that. So don't hold me to that, but I suspect that that's the case. And then phase 4 is just implementation. And so obviously that wouldn't happen until there's actually a project.
Thank you. Next question is, how is your, I think you're calling this a community benefit program. How is that different, putting together a community benefit agreement as defined in California law?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We're calling it program for now, just because we want to be as open and flexible as possible in terms of what it might become. There's certainly every possibility that it could turn into an agreement, or there might be multiple agreements, but I think that's something that needs to be worked out through the process. So it could end up that way, but I guess we won't know till we get there.
I understand. I hear what you're saying. And then I know in CBAs, community benefit agreements, typically there's a negotiating entity or group on the other side of the table or around the table, but it looks like slides to the community meetings. I'll just call them that, kind of a general description. Use the community meetings to come up with and actually
So Mark, I got like every other word of that, but I think I understand the gist. So I'll try to answer.
Yeah, go ahead, Janet, and maybe
Okay.
maybe we can open it up for others while Mark's regaining his connection there.
Okay, so I think I understand the question. At this moment in time in developing the framework, it is more broad. You're right. We're definitely trying to make it as open as we can. But I think what we're really driving toward is that as a part of the framework, we want to work with the community to figure out that process piece. Should a group be formed? If a group should be formed, how would we go about forming it? Would it form itself? Would you form it? We're looking for input on how that would work, because that is one of the nuances of having a community benefits agreement. Implies an agreement between and among parties, and who are those parties? And I think that that's something that, we'll be looking for some input on. If you look at other community benefits agreements, actual signed agreements, that's what there is. There's signing parties. But we're not there yet. And we thought, if we take this in chunks and work on the framework first, the framework isn't an agreement. The framework is just an outline. It's an important piece of it, but it's obviously important to us that it be seen as the commitment we mean it to be, which is why we want it in the EIR. But that's why we're trying to make it, a broad public input, at least right now, without having a single group that we can go to. So I'll stop there.
Very good. And so I don't know how the order of these on my screen. I see Russ, you have your hand up. We'll go Russ, and then James. Deidre, I'm not forgetting about you, but I just like to hit committee members first with questions. Russ, you're on.
Yes, Janet, very good presentation. I did read through your handout, the attachment that we got. I have a question with regards to process of the EIR, EIS. From what you said in your presentation, it appears that this community framework planning, or it would be an attachment to the EIR, EIS. That's the first question, right?
Yeah, it would be an appendix.
Okay, an appendix. So that tells me there's a parallel track. My next question is, do you see any constraints to meeting the EIR, EIS timeline? Or do you need to consider that?
Do you mean in terms of pulling the framework together?
Yeah, for whatever is going to be a part of the EIR, EIS.
Well, I'll say that it's a tight timeline, but
Yeah.
We have every intention of meeting it, and we've got a really good plan to do that. We've got a lot of people that we're putting on the case.
Okay.
A lot of humans are going to be devoted to this, so we'll be able to hit that target.
Good. And then the last question is, I think you kind of touched on it as you create the discussion and have that negotiations for Delta as place fund. Obviously, that's going to have to reside somewhere. So there's obviously going to be an agreement in that. Do you perceive that being decided up front, or do you even know what that would look like? Or some idea?
No, I mean, yeah, we've put a little bit of thought into it, but we didn't want to get ahead of ourselves. Or I guess I wouldn't put it that way. We didn't want to get ahead of the community on that.
Yeah.
So
Understand.
So yeah, so it definitely will have to live somewhere, and that's going to be a big part of what we're going to ask for input on.
Okay, that's my questions at this point. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
All right, thank you, Russ. James? Mr.
Yeah, hello.
Cox, you're on.
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. What I was really curious about is you're saying you're going to have
Yeah.
these interviews with the public over the next couple of months. I'd like to know how you're going to do that in the middle of this pandemic. I mean, here in Contra Costa County, we're back in a shelter-in-place order, and it seems to me that that's kind of, how are you going to, have any kind of meetings with people that are just impromptu type thing, not scheduled like this is? And then also, how do you plan to get the word out to the public at large that this kind of a project is happening?
So yeah, good questions. And we have tried to think through the best ways to do that. In terms of the interviews, we intend for those to just be phone calls or Zoom interviews. And so there will be obviously a process that we'll have to go through that'll be fairly intensive in terms of, scheduling and that kind of thing. But we feel like we've got enough time to do that. It's very unfortunate that we can't do these things in person. But we're pretty comfortable and confident that doing these over the phone or Zoom or other platforms will work. In terms of publicity, we have our normal publicity methods, but we also have built up a pretty extensive network of folks that we would ask to help publicize. So, for example, we would ask Eric to help send the information out. Or anyone, and if they were willing to do that, we hope that they will be. That'll help us get the word out, through the existing channels that exist within the Delta. So, and I guess I would say, if there's anything that you would recommend we do in terms of publicizing the public workshops that we're going to have for this, I'd love to hear it.
Very good. James, does that answer your questions?
Yeah, pretty much.
Deidre, we'll go to you, and then I know Amanda Beck typed in a question on the chat. So Deidre, and then I'll read Amanda Beck's question, unless Amanda's on and wants to make the question live. Deidre, go ahead.
Yeah, Janet, I have a question. So you did
Deidre?
say that the community, I hope, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, Deirdre.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I'd hope that the
Yes.
Community Benefits Fund, that it would facilitate compliance with Delta Plan DPP2, which is respect local land use when siting water or flood facilities or restoring habitat. And I'm wondering, how have you gotten that process? You're supposed to consider comments of local agencies and the Delta Protection Commission. Have you gotten comments from the Delta Protection Commission on the proposed facility sites yet?
So, as it relates to the community benefits program, we're just getting started. So, noted. I appreciate that.
No, I'm talking about the process of getting comments on citing the facilities, because it seems to me if you haven't avoided or reduced conflicts with local land use first, that you're just going to people and kind of trying to buy them off on what's really could be a pretty non-optimal placement of facilities, for example, the intakes in Hood.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. But again, I would just, I suppose, reiterate that that we're, and I know this is frustrating to people, but we're in the green bucket, and the regulatory mitigation bucket is its own bucket. And what I really don't want to do is conflate the two things. And I understand that can be irritating and frustrating. But in terms of the community benefits program, I know there are folks that have that sense, you're just trying to buy us off. From our perspective, though, community benefits programs, community benefits agreements are common for large infrastructure projects. We feel they're the right thing to do. And at this point, we really just want to get input from the community. How does the community feel about a community benefits program? If there is going to be such a thing, what would it look like? How would we organize it? So that's really what I'm focused on right here.
But it was proposed by DWR.
Deidre, do you have any other questions?
For Point Tunnel project. Yeah. but you are aware that a community benefits program was proposed by the Department of Water Resources as mitigation for the impacts under Delta Plan DPP2?
I do know that it was mentioned at the as a part, I think if I'm remembering correctly, Deirdre, and I could be wrong, what I recall is it coming up as a part of the discussion that we were having with the Delta Stewardship Council. So yes, I do recall that. But what we're trying to do here is different and more and better. I mean, at least from my perspective, this is the right time and the right way to go about doing a really robust community benefits program that hopefully, we'll get some good engagement from the community on. So, we'll see. Maybe people don't like the idea. I don't know. I guess that's what we'll find out.
Okay, very good. We've got
Thank you.
questions. And one question from Amanda Beck, which I'll just on your question. Amanda Beck, who lives in Clarksburg. Her question is, how will you be determining who will be interviewed? And then she adds the comment, I would be interested in providing information about Clarksburg's specific Delta plan related to projects, in particular, a North Delta Regional Recreation Area in Clarksburg.
Great. Okay. Yeah,
So,
I just pulled up the chat so I can see
The
that.
question is, how do you determine who you're going to interview?
Yeah, good question. And so we're going through that process right now. It's difficult because we don't have too much time. We're trying to do the interviews in February and March, and we'll do as many as we can in that time frame. What I would say is, if any of you or if you know of anyone or think of anyone who ought to be interviewed, email me, tell me, let me know, and we'll do our best to accommodate that. We are going to have to prioritize a little bit because we just, we don't have unlimited time or unlimited number of people to do the interviews. But we want to try to get to people who have an interest, obviously. I mean, that's important to us. And I would say, I'm glad you brought up the Clarksburg specific plan. And I should have said before, I meant to, and I didn't. We are trying to do our own research as well. Like, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to come in tone deaf. We want to, know what there is to know, work that's been done already in terms of community visioning and that sort of thing, because that's obviously a great place to get information from communities that have already put work into it, put some thought into, plans for themselves. That's obviously a key piece of it. So, Amanda, I think what I would like to do is just follow up with you, and we can talk more about that specific Delta plan separately.
Janet, I know a question that we're going to get asked, or I'm assuming we've been asked already, is how much money is contemplated in being thought about, put up. And I'm guessing there's not a specific amount, but perhaps an order of magnitude. And will the money be coming from the water contractors or some other source? So 2 questions: how much, and however you want to answer that. And number 2, what would be the proposed source of those funds?
Yeah, good questions. I'll answer the second one first because that's easier. And that is, yes, it would be a part of the overall funding of the project, which is borne by the beneficiaries of the project. So participating state water project, public water agencies. In terms of the order of magnitude or the dollar amount, it's just too early. We're at a different stage right now. I don't know about what was said previously or what was contemplated previously. And we obviously will need to get there. I know that it will be important for everybody involved to know not only like a number, but even just an order of magnitude. but we're just not there yet. So hopefully we can get there sooner rather than later.
Okay. Anyone have any other questions?
I do.
See Eric, I can't see everybody. I don't see any questions. in the
Okay,
chat.
I have a question. Hello?
Who was
Yeah,
that?
go
Doug?
for it.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Douglas.
A few of us, we are thinking that because a few communities such as Locke and Walnut
Yes.
Grove, and then we are way under par in terms of the FEMA certificate of 100-year flood. So we are thinking that, well, maybe that BCA should bring all the communities along the river up to the FEMA 100 certification. But would that be too broad and too important that maybe you should be set aside as a condition rather than a community benefit program? So I would just want to hear your take.
Yeah, Douglas, that's a really good question. I don't actually know the answer to it. I think that's kind of above my pay grade, but it would be an important one to suss out. So I'll make a note of it. I'll talk to Carrie about it, see if she has any thoughts on the matter. I'll call you back. And but we won't just leave it there. We'll definitely bring it up as a part of the larger workshops, because that'll be helpful directive in terms of what fits and what would fit somewhere else. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. And I see that Bill Wells posted in the chat. He said that about a year ago, when a similar concept was brought up, the community benefit agreement, the amount ranged at that time from 150 to 300 million. So I'm aware of those numbers. Thank you for the history, Bill. All right, any further questions? Are we
Mark,
good?
Mark, this
Are we
is Janet.
good? Just checking. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that Chris had a question in the chat box. Could the category be expanded to include ecosystem benefits that is not necessarily directly related to the project sponsored by project proponent, but still benefit the impacted community? Yeah, I think the idea is that there are potentially natural resources types of things that ought to be considered. So at least in my mind, that seems like it should be something that's on the table.
Okay, very good. And Janet, could you this evening perhaps, or when it's convenient for you, could you send this PowerPoint over to Eric so he could distribute it to us?
He has it.
I'll send this out following the meeting, Mr. Chair, and maybe with a few other items by the time we conclude tonight.
Okay, very good. Perfect. All right, Janet, can we hopefully look forward to seeing you again in this process?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'd be happy to come back and either keep you updated or weave you in any other way that you think would be helpful. But I appreciate you having me here tonight very much.
Thank you. You're a good communications person. So thank you very much for coming. And this is a really important topic, which my personal guess is that we're seeing that not even first chapter, but just the introduction of what I think will be an item program, whatever it's called. It will be heavily discussed this calendar year. So and possibly beyond. So thank you very much for giving us something that's fresh out of the gate, relatively speaking.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, next item 4, Lindsay. Lindsay, are you there? Give us an update on the
Yes.
December SEC meeting.
Yeah,
There you are, Lindsay.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. So the December SEC meeting
Yes.
focused a lot on this community benefits program and really was a similar presentation to the stakeholder committee. They did actually present a couple ideas and samples, if you will, of what this potentially what community benefit programs looked like. Everything from, there was a sample from LAX in what that looked like. There was a sample or a similar project for New York City for a water treatment plant and integrating with a neighboring country club. And so a couple other of those type projects that really explored what these types of programs would look like. I think from the stakeholders, there was a lot of concern brought up that we're not talking apples to apples here. It's very much apples to oranges because you're really dealing with community impacts, small communities, rural agricultural communities. And so there were some questions about, can we find some other examples that may bring in that type of community type benefit program so that we can see a little more similar type programs, to our region. And so that was a request that was made. So that there was a lengthy discussion on that. I will say, it's been talked about a little bit, and I don't want to dwell on the point of, but that it was expressed by the stakeholders that it does feel that this is a way to buy the project off. I think that, DWR is doing their best to really show that that's not the case, but that is going to have to be a, public concern, criticism that will have to be overcome, which has had to been overcome with the stakeholder committee in general and the project in general. But I definitely think that's going to be a concern that doesn't go away. But there was also a flip side brought up from other stakeholders that if we don't talk about this, then there's going to be nothing on the table, and that may not be the best option either. So, it's really about where do we find benefits, and still looking at all of the project components itself. So definitely a robust discussion. I think, Mark, you said it correctly. This is probably just the preface to the introduction. I mean, I think we're on the very early stages of this and really just getting our heads around what that looks like, what a benefit actually would be, what do our Delta communities need, and what that, what that is. And so I think it'll be a lot of discussion in doing that. We were encouraged as stakeholders to really source people that want to be involved in this process and engaged. And so I think if anybody is interested, speak up and say something. If you don't speak up, they don't know that you're interested in that you want to, participate in that. And so it was definitely a put out there of speak up if you want to be heard in that. So that's kind of wrapped up from the community benefits program. And then we really focused on a technical presentation regarding the Bethany complex and really diving deeper into that Bethany alternative and what that looks like, really looking at the configuration of that reservoir and pumping plant, aqueducts, and then really talking a lot about the traffic study that they were going to be doing relating to that. The Bethany Reservoir is going to be one of the main alternatives that is going to be flushed out in the EIR based on the scoping report. And so they're really showcasing what they're going to be doing in fully vetting that alternative through the EIR process. And so there was a big discussion on the traffic analysis, what that looks like, the areas they were going to be looking at, some of the initial conditions they'd already seen, and there was a lot of discussions back and forth on things they need to look for, areas they need to study, and impacts to the community that maybe they hadn't thought about. So really December was just focused again on the community benefits program, the Bethany alternative. Our next meeting is coming up on the 27th. I feel like that's going to still be fleshing out the Bethany alternative a little bit more in detail and really looking at different components of that. There was an email that came out today from DCA talking about their public engagement outlook plan, as well as their potential timeline for the EIR release, which is still they're still shooting for early to mid 2022, for that timeline. So still really ramping up on some of these alternatives and different things that will be fleshed out further in that EIR. That's all I have.
Mr. Chair, would it be okay if Lindsay just said a few words about the Bethany alternative? That might be a little.
Hey, Lindsay, how is yes, Lindsay, could you kind of expand on what that is, the Bethany alternative?
Yeah, so the Bethany alternative, the best way I can describe that is it's another, and if anybody else wants to jump in and add into this, Gil or anybody else, please correct me if I don't have this kind of quite, all summed up. But it uses the same alignment as the eastern alignment up to the lower Roberts Island shaft. And it's got 2 additional maintenance shafts that would be needed for the Bethany alternative. And really what it's doing is a different southern complex aside from using where the current southern complex is being sited and using Clifton Court. So the Bethany alternative would actually go and kind of bypass, it would tie into the Bethany Reservoir, which is south of Clifton Court, versus utilizing and going more westward and tying into Clifton Court that way. So it's a little bit more on an eastern alignment and bypasses Clifton Court and ties into the Bethany Reservoir for the southern portion of the complex is really kind of what it is in a nutshell.
Yeah, this is Gilbert Cosio. I think the main difference, as Lindsay was describing, is that they won't have to build a second forebay. That forebay was going to take about 7 million cubic yards of material, which meant that material had to be hauled from muck piles and other areas where they have stockpiled material on trucks or on railroad, clogging up a lot of the Delta roadways and also causing a lot of impacts as far as damage to roadways and rebuilding of bridges, that sort of thing. So that's kind of the main benefit that the project proponents see, is that it's going to cut a lot of extra work and impacts down by not having to build that big forebay.
I think during the SEC meeting, I asked an uneducated question, which was, do you save costs on building this, changing to Beverly Island? And they said cost is not a factor. So it was an uneducated question that I asked.
Okay, I think does everybody understand so it reroutes on the eastern alignment. It essentially is it rerouting, creating anyway, it saves digging a big hole. I think, is that a way to sum it up simply?
Yeah, I think it's just they're looking at it as a more efficient use of resources in that area, and it was one of the alternatives that was introduced in the scoping process, and one of the ones that they will be fully vetting in great detail within the EIR.
I also, this is Russ, I also heard, Gilbert, correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I also heard that it also would have some savings in open cut pipe below surface versus a tunnel. Not a portion of a tunnel in the south as compared to another alternative that would have complete tunneling.
There's a little less tunneling, but not a whole lot. It's just at the very end, they're going to change the way they get water pumped up to the reservoir by putting some open cut tunnels in. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Any questions? Does anyone have any questions of Lindsay? Lindsay, thank you for keeping us up to speed. And by the way, if you think it's at your discretion, if you think it's important for us to know anything that comes out of let's say the January 27th meeting or any other meeting, don't hesitate to email me or Eric or even the entire group. if you think something important for us to address or at least be informed about. I see Deidre, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did have my hand raised. Thank you very much. Lindsay, I just wanted to ask you, I know you've been on the Stakeholder Engagement Committee representing the Sacramento County Farm Bureau. There's a lot of impacts of the project on agriculture. Was it your understanding that your input as a member of the committee was for the purpose, was the comments of the Sacramento County Farm Bureau for the purpose of Delta Plan DPP 2, avoid or reduce conflicts with local land uses?
So I'm on the committee representing all of Delta agriculture, really focusing on the Delta caucus, which includes all 5 Delta County Farm Bureaus. What we're looking for is really having input on the construction decisions and impacts that are being made on, through the construction design. So we fully are aware that we can't comment and get into any of the specifics on mitigation efforts, eminent domain, any of those things for the actual operational side of the project. And so really are more involved in this on a agricultural perspective to ensure that the construction needs are being considerate of local agriculture, and that we are aware of what's happening in the process from the beginning, so that we can inform the local landowners and potential impacts coming their way. So I think where I look at, I am not looking at this point within my involvement in this committee specifically related to the DP2. That will come later with, our commenting and things that are done outside and actually getting into the more EIR, process and that nature. I'm looking at my involvement with this committee on really just raising issues of impacts on Delta agriculture, and then taking the information that we learn on their construction projects and making sure that those local landowners that are affected are aware of what those are earlier rather than later.
So would it be correct to say that during this entire process, your understanding is that input about alternative decisions for siting the facilities that would avoid or reduce impacts on local agricultural uses would be done with the CEQA comments, and not during this process, not during the stakeholder engagement process?
We've definitely commented on, citing and things for different areas within this process, but the majority of that in a concrete capacity needs to be done additionally in the CEQA process. But we have weighed in.
Are you aware, are you aware that CEQA and the Delta Reform Act are 2 completely different statutes? So comments on one might not be comments on the other?
Yes, I'm definitely aware of that. But with with this project and what we're looking at is we are just looking at construction and those types of elements. And the stakeholder committee or DCDCA has, instructed us over and over and over again that we're just talking about construction impacts and things. And we have met with them on, multiple occasions about impacts of specifically the Twin Cities complex, the muck piles, and the siting for the intakes in particular, additionally the haul roads and what that's going to do and impact on local agriculture. And those are the things that we've raised questions on. I wouldn't say that we've been successful in shifting any sightings or anything like that when it comes to changing some of those things. I know other entities have been successful on changing some things, benefiting habitat and look at things like that, but we're still raising those issues, bringing things of concern, challenging, I think, especially their notion that the tunnel muck is going to be all completely reusable and, is not going to have any, implications that aren't going to be used, and so we've challenged that at every step of the way. But it's definitely something that we will reiterate every comment that we've made through the stakeholder process, both against the Reform Act and against the CEQA process. So I'm looking at saying everything in a committee fashion within the stakeholder committee, and then also in writing and formal comments, regardless of the overlap.
Awesome.
Very good. Thank you, Lindsay. I think maybe it's me cutting out or you cutting out. So good job. Thank you. Good questions. Let's, I don't see any other questions. Let's move on to next item, item 5, report from Harriet on,
yeah. Hi, can you guys all hear me?
go ahead.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead, Harriet.
Okay, hi, I'm Harriet Ross, Assistant Planning Director of the Delta Stewardship Council, and I'm going to share my screen here and talk to you a little bit about the council's climate study called Delta Adapts. Give me a minute here. Okay, so do you all see the PowerPoint with no notes? I'm assuming yes.
Yeah, we want to see your notes. Those are really cool. We like the notes.
Well, if you could
Yeah, we
see my
see
notes,
it.
and you wouldn't need me.
Harriet, what I'm seeing is cut off because I think maybe it's a landscape versus portrait orientation issue.
Oh, no.
Mine's cut off too.
Oh, no.
It's cut off on the left side of the screen. Do you want me to pull up the PowerPoint slideshow? I've got it on my computer and I can advance for you.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead? Sorry.
No worries.
I even went over this today on our council Zoom account too. So, okay. Well, while you're pulling that up, as I mentioned, I'll be talking about the council's climate change study called Delta Adapts. It consists of both a vulnerability assessment and an adaptation strategy. And we're currently working on the vulnerability assessment at this point, and we should have a public draft out for review, hopefully next Friday, or if not, the week after that. So I'll be sharing some of those key findings with all of you today as they relate to Delta as place. So the overarching goal of Delta Adapts is to build climate resilience in the Delta. Next slide, please. And we have identified 4 study goals, and that's really to inform future Delta plan amendments and implementation, help the state prioritize future actions and investments, provide a toolkit of information for local governments to use in the regulatory documents, and serve as a framework to be built upon by the council and others in the future. Delta Adapts is a regional study. We cover a large area, the entire Delta Sassoon Marsh, shown there in red. This is consistent with our regulatory authority, and it is a planning level study really designed to inform policy. A lot of other climate assessments have been done out there by other state agencies and individual cities and counties, but those typically focus either on the assets those agencies own, or they analyze vulnerabilities based on certain conditions. And Delta Adapts really looks at a much broader range of asset types and climate change conditions, and it's designed to be complementary with all these other efforts. Our study looks at a range of climate stressors and hazards, specifically changes in air temperature, precipitation and hydrologic patterns, changes in sea level rise, and those corresponding hazards of extreme heat, wildfire, drought, and flooding. So as I mentioned, we cover a broad range of assets, and today I'm going to be going over those key findings in the vulnerability assessment as they relate to Delta as an evolving place. So I'll be covering people, places, agriculture, recreation, and infrastructure. And for the other assets, you can look at the vulnerability assessment for those findings or at past council presentations where we've discussed those key findings for those other assets that I won't be covering today. So in this next slide here, here's our flood hazard maps. This is the result of the flood analysis we did. You can see here, it shows the likelihood of flooding currently, and then projects out to our various planning horizons. You can see here the current conditions, 2020 and 2030 are almost the same. And in these two first maps, about 10% of the Delta's land and 2% of the population is exposed to flooding in a 100-year flood event. And at 2050, the third map to the right, you start to see substantial additional flooding throughout the central and south Delta. 35% of the Delta's land area and over 10% of the population is exposed to a 100-year flood. And then actually of that, more than 42,000 people living in communities that are considered highly socially vulnerable to flooding. And then you can see in 2085, things get much worse. Most of the South and Central Delta there are exposed to flooding on a less than 10-year reoccurrence. So in other words, there would be a 65% chance of these areas flooding over a 10-year period. So at a 100-year storm event, 68% of the Delta's land area and 20% of the Delta's population would be exposed to flooding on that last map there. That's about 120,000 people. And of those 120,000 people, more than half, about 71,000, live in highly socially vulnerable areas. And then during a 200-year storm event, 44% of the Delta's population would be exposed to flooding. And that is about 275,000 people. And most of these folks are predominantly concentrated in the Stockton and the Pocket area of Sacramento. And then you can see across all planning scenarios and existing conditions, the North Delta remains relatively secure, even with substantial climate change conditions projected in the future. And this really highlights the value of past flood management investments along the Sacramento and American rivers, and most importantly, the Yellow Bypass. Gil, did you have a question for me?
I don't have a question yet. I just wanted to, whenever we go to questions, I had a question.
Oh, okay, great.
And I actually figured out how to raise my hand, so.
Oh, that's important in the Zoom world.
Actually, Harriet, it would be good for everyone to know the assumptions about levee improvements or no levee improvements as well.
Yes, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that first, started off with that. These flood maps and our flood modeling does assume existing conditions. No, in other words, we're not assuming any future levee investments in the Delta. So this is based on the way the levees, the levee heights and the way the levees are configured today. That's our assumption. And also this is an overtopping of the levee analysis only. We're not looking at seepage. We're not looking at, catastrophic failure, only overtopping of levees. So those are our underlying assumptions of these flood maps. Okay, so now moving on. So what I'm going to do now is basically go over the key findings for each of these asset types, starting with people or communities. So in addition to flooding, our vulnerability assessment also looks at impacts from extreme heat and wildfire smoke. And so based on the flooding scenario in the 2050, so I'm going to basically present several graphics that look similar to this that break it down by climate vulnerabilities and hazards, flooding, extreme heat, and wildfire specifically here. And they're all in these numbers, and these acreages that we present are all based on the 2050 flood hazard map. So yeah, so back to people here, you can see that again, I think went over this, that roughly 66% or 66,000 people in the Delta would have a 1% chance of experiencing flooding each year by mid-century, and 2/3 of those exposed population live in communities with high social vulnerability. Really those communities with limited resources to prepare for and recover from flooding. In regard to extreme heat exposure, we use the state climate models to project extreme heat days for mid-century and end-of-century conditions. The Delta region currently experiences less than 10 extreme heat days per year, and the models predict that will increase to about 17 to 25 days per year. All the communities will experience a significant increase in extreme heat days, but people in Stockton and Tracy have particularly high vulnerability to extreme heat because they'll experience the greatest change in exposure, and both have communities with high social vulnerabilities. And these cities are projected to experience approximately 25 extreme heat days compared to their current 5 days per year. And then based on our literature review and qualitative analysis of the vulnerability to wildfire, we concluded that the greatest potential wildfire hazard is really the air quality impacts on the Delta and its residents. So combined with the air quality impacts we already expect to see due to more extreme heat days, this poses a risk to the health of the people and communities in our area in the Delta. Now moving on to places, the next slide. The places asset type encompasses a variety of assets, including cultural sites, critical facilities, and residential and commercial buildings. So similar to the last set of findings, we use the same 2050 flood map overlaid over these assets. And for 2050, we found that there are 6 culturally significant sites that would be exposed to flooding, which could damage or destroy these areas. Specifically, there are 4 historic sites, 3 of which are located in San Joaquin County, and 1 in the city of Ileton. And 2 legacy towns would be exposed to flooding, and that includes Rio Vista and Ileton. 11 life safety facilities would be exposed to flooding. Those are all fire stations, 19 schools, and 11 wastewater treatment plants would be exposed to flooding in 2050. Additionally, nearly 17,000 parcels of residential uses and over 2,000 parcels of commercial and industrial uses would be exposed to flooding, with a combined value of close to $4 billion. And lastly, more extreme heat events will put added demand on critical facilities due to heat-related injuries and illnesses. It will also result in more energy costs to cool homes and buildings. So the next is agriculture. Expected changing climate conditions, including increased flooding, warming temperatures, and extreme precipitation, will continue to increase and affect Delta agriculture. No surprise there. Flooding exposure is estimated to impact approximately 35% of the land currently being farmed, which amounts to about $72 million in assets exposed, and an additional $79 million in annual economic activity that would be interrupted if flooding were to occur. Much of the agricultural area exposed to flooding in 2050 is located in San Joaquin and Sacramento counties. And so there are some crops that would benefit from a longer growing season due to the heat, but overall crop yields are expected to decrease with increased stress from variable temperatures and water quality. The summers will be longer and hotter with more extreme heat days, and there'll be less tule fog and winter chill that are vital for fruit and nut tree yields. Impacts from droughts and sea level rise together may create episodic negative impacts to water quality and soil salinity management. And many of these Delta crops are sensitive to changes in salinity, temperature, and water schedules, which could affect plant and overall crop yields. Warmer temperatures will favor yields in some of the Delta crops, and accelerated growth may positively influence some yields, but may negatively impact overall crop quality. And these agriculture findings are really based on the existing literature that is out there now. We didn't do very much analysis other than the flood analysis and its impact on the number of acreage affected, but the rest of it is really due to from research from literature review that's out there that's applicable to the Delta itself. And then the next asset type is recreation. Our flooding analysis shows exposure of approximately 45 parks and campgrounds by 2050, Obviously, this is significant in the Delta, is that, you know, this area is already short on areas accessible to the public as well as amenities. Specifically, 13 campgrounds would be exposed to flooding, which represents about a quarter of the total campgrounds in the Delta. Most of the campgrounds and parks that would be exposed to flooding are located in or near the cities of Stockton and Lathrop. Most trails and scenic highways affected are located in Sacramento County. Also, projected increases in extreme heat events may negatively impact visitation to these recreational facilities. And then lastly, with drought, more frequent and severe drought conditions may also impact specific activities such as fishing and boating, basically all water related activities. Okay, then moving on to the last asset type, infrastructure. We looked at impacts from flooding and extreme heat to energy and utilities, transportation, solid waste facilities, flood management infrastructure, and water supply infrastructure. A range of natural gas and oil pipelines and wells would be exposed to flooding with an estimated value of about $800 million, while the value of the electrical facilities exposed total about $1.5 billion and include substations, transmission towers, and transmission lines. The Delta is home to regional transportation routes, and if exposed, obviously would disrupt commute patterns, disrupt jobs and businesses that rely on these transportation routes. And flood exposure to roads are valued at about $1.1 billion, and railroad facilities valued at about $83 million. And some of these facilities also serve as evacuation routes. Flooding would also impact, anticipated to affect the Port of Stockton. Obviously, I think many of us know that it's a very busy port. It's actually the state's 4th busiest port, and impacts and disruption to those operations would result in job losses and impact businesses that really rely on the port. Solid waste sites, contaminated sites, hazardous waste facilities would all be exposed to flooding. This can reduce or can cause risk to health and safety of the residents and the ecosystems in the Delta. Approximately 1,300 miles of Delta levees can be exposed to flooding, putting stress on the entire system of flood management infrastructure protecting the area, and nearly 50 miles of water conveyance infrastructure and a number of state and local points of diversion. And over 3,400 private points of diversion, such as pumps, may be also exposed to flooding. Extreme heat can reduce the ability to transmit power, making power outages more common, and can damage roadway and rail infrastructure. So that these are just a selection of the key findings, again, related to these specific asset types. There are so many other findings for many other asset types that we do look at that are all contained within the vulnerability assessment. So if you want to know about anything else, please look at the vulnerability assessment itself. It lays it all out pretty clearly, those key findings. Next slide here. Just wanted to quickly go over the engagement activities that we have undergone throughout this process. I think it's closing in on 2 years now that we've been working on this, so it's been a while. We've had ongoing collaboration with our agency partners, built off of really existing models and data created by others. Worked extensively to ensure future flood studies are generally consistent. We've had a series of stakeholder briefings. I think we counted over 70 briefings where we met with stakeholders to ground truth our data and to really verify our results. So we feel good with what we're putting out there. We also launched a significant effort to outreach to community-based organizations who have also helped us structure our engagement to reach vulnerable communities in the Delta. And in fact, we're currently planning with 4 CBOs, community-based organizations in the Stockton area for a virtual workshop in early February that we'll be holding for the public in that area. We've also had a technical advisory committee. This consists of experts in climate change and in the system that has really provided input on our approach and our analyses every step of the way. And we've also had engaged a stakeholder work group. We've met a few times that consists of local agencies, cities, counties, environmental groups, water districts, and we've received feedback and data from that group as well. And we do plan on expanding this level of engagement as we move forward onto the next phase of the project, adaptation. So just wanted to end my presentation really quickly on the significance of Delta adapts. I think we all know a lot of work has been done in the Delta related to climate change, but really this is the first comprehensive climate change study for this area, including Sassoon Marsh. We also developed comprehensive flood and water supply models that can evaluate a wide range of conditions and are flexible to new information. So as you know, different agencies come out and there's different regulations to build to whatnot, we can easily pull that information out of our models, or we can use new information, rerun the model, and come up with a new set of maps. Also, everything we have is open source, and we're happy to share the models. We've also developed, I didn't really get a chance to go into this too deeply, but we did develop a socially vulnerable index where we basically identified 14 factors that are indications, high concentrations of these number of factors are indications of vulnerability to climate hazards we looked at. And so really through that process and through this index, we've identified 3 main areas that we're considering highly socially vulnerable in the Delta. And you know, this really allows us to focus where adaptation should occur and equitably in the future. As I mentioned, we've gone through an extensive community engagement process. And lastly, we also have worked closely and collaboratively with our agency partners in developing the methodology, the models, the data, the analyses. And perhaps most importantly, we're really complementary with other climate studies, especially put out by other state agencies. Oh, I lied, there is one more slide. Next steps, as I mentioned, we should be releasing our public draft vulnerability assessment towards the end of next week. We'll put it out for a 30-day public comment period, and then we'll finalize that shortly, hopefully shortly after that point, and then we'll launch straight into adaptation. So that's it for my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Russ, go ahead. I think, or no, I'm sorry, Gilbert.
Okay, well thanks. Thanks, Harriet. That was a good presentation. First, I want to give kudos to Harriet and Jeff and their staff because they have reached out to locals quite a bit. I've been on their technical advisory group for a couple of years, and then more recently, as they were looking into some of the flood issues, we brought in Chris Nudek from KSN and talked a lot to our H&H group in our office to make sure that the hydraulics and levee issues that they were looking at were, adequate to what we see out there. And also, one of the questions that came up was, when will a levee fail if it overtops? And we worked out a situation where I think it's pretty good because we have had a lot of levees overtop over the years. They haven't failed. So the GSC staff did take our comments into consideration on what kind of flood fighting we would do. And obviously at some point we'd lose the battle, but they did raise the level that other studies have not looked at when they look at overtopping and other forms of failure. So thanks for letting us in on that. And I'm glad Eric asked that question about what happens, what are the assumptions that go on here, because I've seen this presentation a lot, but I've had calls from colleagues and clients when they've seen it at other venues, and the first question they ask is, don't they know we're going to do something about this? And the answer is yes, but it's hard in these studies to cover everything. And obviously we've got a levy program now that is about 2/3 state share and 1/3 local share. And even if the state money went away, the locals are still going to do whatever they can to keep those levies up. And certainly I've been out there over 37 years, and these levies were not the shape they're in now 37 years ago. We would have, if we hadn't done anything to the levies over the last 37 years, we would have lost levees about every 3 or 4 years. The tides get high enough to overtop what those levees look like in 1984. So the locals are not going to stop working on these. So it's some point, we need to start thinking about, okay, what does all this mean in real life? This is a study, and certainly there are going to be people that take these results or preliminary results and run with them, and suddenly the delta is going to hell in a handbasket, just like a lot of the other studies have kind of concluded. But so anyway, the question I have, though, it's kind of a long introduction. I know the Stewardship Council and the ISB are embarking on more social science, which I think is directly related to delta as place, which is kind of something we've been waiting for a long time. Early on in the DSC process, an expert panel of experts was convened, and they spent about a week in the delta and came up with some good suggestions. And one of them was, you've got to really look at the social science. If you're going to consider delta as place, if you don't understand what that means from non-numerical or non-physical type criteria, it's more than just a few islands and a few people living out there. It's a lot more complex. Hopefully, at some point you'll be able to take that social science and merge it with what you're coming up here, Harriet, and then you can tell us better what does this mean and who's going to fix it. I mean, is this a problem that society throughout the state or the country needs to worry about, or is it just the locals? Like, we're kind of stuck to it now. But anyway, I guess that's my main question. What's going to happen as a social science? How are you going to merge that? It sounds like you're going to come up with a draft report soon. And how are you going to address the fact that the actual delta as place study, as I would call it, is not really included yet?
Yeah, I mean, we're really looking at it as, this is the study, the results of the modeling results, and here it is, and here's a set of maps. And really what it means and how we're going to address it is really, we're pushing to adaptation. There are a lot of things, for example, we might say, we are saying all these areas are flooded, and here's your economic, we do cover some social science. We have an economic study, and we have economic exposure values included in the vulnerability assessment. We are thinking about communities and what does this mean, but really how do we address it is the next phase of the project. And I really see that coming together at that point. There's nothing, we've always said, like, we're kind of on a slippery slope here. We're presenting all these flood maps and presenting all this data about how it affects the communities, but it doesn't ultimately, at the end of the day, if someone's farming something and it's flooded, or climate change is affecting their production levels, it doesn't mean they're going to stop farming if that is what they want to do, and if that is their heritage, and this is what they want to keep doing, then they change what they plant. So there's all of this, the human aspect of it is considered, but really not until adaptation. So that's what I would have to say about that. I know it's not satisfying at this point. I get it.
I want answers now. Come on.
I know.
Thank you, Gilbert. Douglas. I think Douglas has a question.
Sure.
Okay, hi.
Oh,
okay,
sorry.
my question is, recently that the DCA has done a social justice survey. So are you tapping into that information?
When it's ready, we'll take a look at it. That's DWR's study, DCA study. So we'll look at it, but we haven't seen the results of that study yet. But we at the council here, like I said, and I didn't get to talk about it, and I kind of see some questions on the chat about the socially vulnerable population. And no, that's not identified in the Delta Reform Act. But there's a lot of state guidance and a requirement for state agencies to address disadvantaged communities. And so we're looking at, so we developed our own socially vulnerable index and identified those areas in the Delta that meet those requirements. So we've sort of done that on our own. with state guidance in mind, and identified these areas. And that's where the social vulnerability aspect of the findings came through. And that's how we presented that. So that's really the first, we hope to do a lot more. And this is why we're partnering with these community-based organizations to really help us reach out to all aspects.
Thank you, Douglas. Russ, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Harriet, thank you very much for the presentation. I had one question and Gilbert took one of my questions, so I've got another question to match up against that. I have a couple comments, and I know a lot of your details probably in your report. And I do know that you've been dealing with.
Russ, you're on.
Huh? Can you hear me?
I can. I think there's a delay.
Is there a delay? Can you?
Or not with you. I'm sorry. I can hear you just fine. Sorry.
I'll go on. So my question is, and thanks, Eric, for clarifying that we're using existing conditions. As in all adaptation plans, there's a period of time in which you want to update data. And I'll tell you why this is important, is because as the local entities that have these levees in the Delta that are, vulnerable, and we're potentially increasing the standard into the future, that's going to have a positive impact for securing the levees as we move forward into the future as it relates to sea level rise, which is another question I had about your assumptions on sea level rise and its probabilities. I assume those are in the report as well, because they can vastly vary from 1 foot up to 10 feet. Now, the other thing I wanted to address with sea level rise is, are you also looking at actual sea level rise? Because there's data already, 20 years of data that I know of that's out there that accounts for towards San Francisco Bay, what that sea level rise is actually occurring, just because there's infrastructure that's affected by that. Then my next question is your data easily parsable for looking at primary zone versus other outside the primary zone Delta? Because I heard you allude to data and figures associated to Stockton, which, is that outside the primary Delta, inside the primary Delta. So that's one comment. And the other one is, you talked about agricultural impacts. Have you coordinated with the University of Pacific, which has given the Delta Protection Commission a presentation of those trends of impacts, which I would imagine you'd want to incorporate some of that into your adaptation strategy? And those really are my major general questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I jotted them all down, so you're going to have to help remind me, but the ones I did jot down. Sea level rise, we looked at increments ranging from 6 inches to 10 feet, which is consistent with OPC guidance.
Right.
Our model does take into, and I'm not going to do it justice, I'm not the engineer, but we had engineers work on this. So yes, they projected, 6 inches to 10 feet of sea level rise and in the Delta. So how it would translate and move into the Delta, that was all considered in the model. The parts of the numbers I gave you for the acreages and the amount of people affected, I could break it down by primary and secondary zone, but I gave them to you all as one lump sum for the areas within the Delta. So when I say Stockton, I mean the portion of Stockton located within the Delta.
Okay.
But yes, we could easily, portion that if that was desired. And in fact, we're building right now. It's not ready yet. Hopefully, within a month or so, we're building a Shiny app, and we'll be loading up all these flood layers and assets and city and county boundaries, primary zone, secondary zone boundaries, all in this app, accessible online platform, and you can kind of play around with it and see what exactly is flooded.
Would that be an open source application?
Yes.
Okay. The other thing too, in terms of your dollar figures from an economic standpoint, are you talking about current dollars? Are you defining what year that is? Or are you talking about future costs?
Current dollars, 2018. We project out to 20, but we use 2050 flood exposure maps to determine that. So, but it's 2018 dollars.
And are you assuming any indices moving forward into the future for future impacts?
I'm not sure I know what that means.
Well, you have future costs that if you have a cost today's dollar, you assume a certain percent moving
Like an
forward under
escalation.
some.
No,
Yeah.
there are 2018 dollars.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Russ. Deidre?
Yeah, thank you.
Deidre, we're
Harriet?
kind of running a little bit short on time, but make it as short as you can if you don't mind.
Okay, I just wanted to say, Harriet, thank you. I think this is an incredibly important study. And I told the Central Valley Flood Board in 2019, whether people are displaced at 2050 or whether they even survive are going to depend on the investments we make now. So this is really critically important information. And I also wanted to thank you for it being open source.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, there were questions from Chris Elias in the chat. And I don't know if Chris would want to ask them now or if he's unable to for us to hear him. But do you want me to read those or do you want to take those offline?
Yes, I'm having a hard time. Maybe it's my connection. Yes, could you, and then maybe Harriet can read the questions in the chat as well to answer Chris's questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess a couple, and I'll try to summarize. Forgive
Eric,
me.
yeah, could you read those for everybody, please?
Yeah, I'll do that now. I'll try to summarize because there's a few here. So the first question was about the projection through 2050 because Chris says that DWR's projections are to 2040 and 2065. Was there a reason behind selecting 2050 or just going?
Yeah, so we followed the OPC guidance and they have certain projections of increments of sea level rise by certain time frames. And so that made the most sense to us. And that's how we ended up with 2050. 2100 is what the Delta Reform Act says we're supposed to address and acknowledge. But it was really our models were so, they just were not as accurate. So we went as far out as we could, and that's why we present data in 2085. We do have the data for 2100, and for any year, that's the beauty of the water supply and the flood models we have. We can pull out this data for any year we want to look at, but we're just presenting it for 2050 and 2085 because that's just what worked. It was the most applicable and consistent with state guidance and where we felt most comfortable the data was still stable and accurate. I'm not sure that I understand the second question that Chris has.
Yeah, maybe jumping forward to the 2065 projections for the San Joaquin River system. And maybe that's the one I'm not quite sure I understand the question there, but I guess the implication is that DWR has a different projection for potential flows in the San Joaquin River system.
Yeah, I don't know if Chris wants to elaborate. I think that's what it's saying.
I'm sorry, Harriet and Eric. I was just trying to, I guess, unmute myself for a long time. Anyway, so the simple question was, DWR's projection for 2065 is that the San Joaquin River system is going to experience about 300,000 CFS in flow. That's triple the flow we have today. So the question I was trying to get to is, what is the kind of adaptation you're looking for then, and are you proposing for the San Joaquin River system for that type of flow? That's first. And then to summarize, if the source of the flow then is outside your jurisdiction, meaning outside the reach of the council. So how then do you plan to address that?
I'm probably going to butcher this, but I think this is related to that the San Joaquin River can only hold 300,000 CFS from what I recall. And we assumed there was some comments about showing where, because we project more than that, that amount to flow in the San Joaquin or to reach the San Joaquin River at that point. So we had to make some assumptions. Our model does, I think the DWR model, if I remember correctly, assumes upstream mitigation and I can't remember if that's something about their 3D model. It shows the flows all the way where it would exit the channel. And whereas we're assuming all full 300,000 CFS would flow through and flood at the bottom of the San Joaquin near the Stockton area. Is that what you're talking about, Chris?
Correct. So basically that projection is about triple the flow today. That's 100,000 CFS. So, and if the main stem, if the existing channel rarely manages 100,000 CFS, then what is the adaptation plan then for handling the triple the flow for the population that's downstream? Well,
this is why we decided to take this project truly in 2 phases and study and share the science behind the vulnerability analysis. And what we do with adaptation, especially for things that are outside of our authority, is remain to be seen. And we haven't quite defined that, but I would imagine it could include upstream holding of the water before it hits downstream and floods communities. But I don't have the answer for that. But that is something that we have talked about extensively in-house, and how we address that. I can't answer that at this point.
Okay. So then the final question I have, I'm sorry. Then the final question I have, I guess, since you can't answer that first question is, then what is this term socially vulnerable? That's the first time I've heard about that. So is that defined somewhere in the Delta Reform Act or somewhere, some other statute?
Yeah, so another way, I don't know how familiar you are with state guidance and literature on disadvantaged communities. There's different terms to be used. The state defines disadvantaged communities, and there's other various terms to be used. However, through our conversations with communities and community-based organizations, a lot of people don't like that term. So we sort of defined it on our own. And this goes back to that socially vulnerable index that I said we created. It's customized to the Delta. And so through our, we did a lot of literature review. We talked to other agencies that have done similar studies on their own. And we kind of put together 14 factors that we think really define social vulnerability, how vulnerable you are to flooding, for example. And so we used those factors and then defined and identified 3 main geographic areas in the Delta that were, quote, highly socially vulnerable to the climate hazards that we looked at. That's the short of it. I could go on. I don't know, maybe we could take this offline and I can send you some of the literature, or you can take a look at our equity analysis and the vulnerability assessment itself, which does a much better job at explaining what social vulnerability is.
Very good. Thank you. Great questions. Any other, we're running a little bit short on time. Trying to move it along a little bit here. Are there any other questions before we thank Harriet? Seeing none. Harriet, thank you so much.
No problem.
And look forward hopefully to seeing more of you in the future as this develops, and thank you for keeping us informed. I hope this has been helpful.
Yes, thank you very much for having me.
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt, but one final question for Harriet. Can you say a little bit more about the second phase and how that intends to, I mean, how will the adaptation strategy be used by the council?
So we are in the process of sort of identifying a process to identify a process to how we'll get to adaptation and defining an adaptation framework. And so we are having these internal conversations. We hope to talk with our council to get some more direction. I mean, I know, again, I know it's not very satisfying, but we really don't have it defined. There's a lot of ideas. You know, do we stick to only the areas that we have authority over? Do we, you know, only look at, do we look at everything like we did in the vulnerability assessment? We looked at a variety of asset types. You know, of course, we hope to forge, you know, continue our partnerships with various partner agencies, as well as stakeholders, the local agencies, local cities and counties, and really hope to work together to define this adaptation strategy. Obviously, we don't build projects here at the council, so we are looking at others to do that. And so we know that we have to come, you know, we can't go at it alone, and it has to be something that is done with our stakeholders. And what comes out of it, what people are willing, what other agencies are willing to do, that's the unknown part at this point.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, very good. Thank you very much, Harriet. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
We have, Eric, can you just kind of hit number 6 real quick, if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Chair. There's only 3 things I'll report on to the committee. The first is that on the Delta Conveyance Project, the commission has requested to the Corps of Engineers. I think everyone knows that the Army Corps of Engineers is preparing the environmental impact statement. So the federal corollary to the state environmental review process coordinated by DWR. And as part of the federal EIS, the Corps will be undertaking a National Historic Preservation Act analysis. It's called Section 106. And this basically is how the proposed project would impact historic features in the Delta, which we have a lot of in throughout the area that'll be highly impacted by the proposed project. So we will be participating in that Section 106 consultation. We had earlier requested to be what's called a cooperating agency. That request was denied by the Corps, but they have embraced our participation in the Section 106 process. And we hope that we can bring along some additional Delta parties as well to join us in that. So we'll be reaching out specifically to the counties, and even other local organizations can join that process, and we hope they do. We'll be happy to assist them. The other thing I wanted to report is that we had our first meeting of the National Heritage Area Management Plan Advisory Committee yesterday. A few of the people on this meeting are also on that committee, so thank you for the folks who are doing double duty. That was the kickoff meeting. It initiates the formal work on developing the mandated management plan for the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta National Heritage Area. Those meetings will continue on a every 2 to 3 month process. We will next meet in late February. Those meetings are open to the public. We announce them through our normal channels and would be happy to welcome anyone to join those if you are interested. And finally, I just want to let the committee know that we will have some new commission members, just as I mentioned that we have a new chair. Supervisor Skip Thompson from Solano County did not run for re-election. Just yesterday, the Solano County Board of Supervisors selected Supervisor John Vasquez as the new commission member. Incoming Supervisor Mitch Mashburn, who represents most of the Delta region in Solano County, had asked to defer on stepping into that role, and Supervisor Vasquez agreed to step forward. So He will be our new commission member representing Solano County. And then we will have 2 new commission members representing cities, both in Yolo and Sacramento counties, given that former Mayor Cabaldon from West Sacramento was not reelected. And also our commission member from the city of Oakley did not run for reelection. So we'll have a new city council member representing the cities in Solano and Contra Costa counties. I don't know who they are yet, but I'll know between now and January 21st. So more detail to come on that. That's all I wanted to report on, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Eric. The last substantive item on the agenda is, which I received some emails about, interestingly enough, item 7, selecting dates for calendar 21. So the purpose, as I said in my email earlier today, is really we want to kind of step up our game a little bit, become a little bit more organized instead of doing the typical survey before each meeting. So we set meetings for the whole year. Number 2, we'd like to have the meetings as close as reasonably possible to the next commission meeting, so that our what we talk about is as relevant as possible to what the commission might be considering the next time that it meets. But we can't be too close. And so I had just kind of thrown out the first Wednesday of the month. That's what today is. I did get, I hope I'm remembering everybody's email. I think I took good notes, but Mariah, who's our representative, she's down in Stockton, she's with Restore the Delta, has said she had a hard stop on that date because she's got a hard conflict on the first Wednesday. I think that was the only issue. Everybody else was open the entire first week of the month. Eric?
Lindsay as well, Mr. Chair. She had a standing conflict on the first Wednesday of the month.
Oh, Lindsay as well. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much. But I believe everybody else was open all the other days. I know I have a hard stop on the first Thursday. My fire district has a set meeting on the first Thursday of the month and has had for, I think, decades. But that leaves the first Tuesday. So first of all, let's talk about a date and then talk about a time. Is the first Tuesday good with everybody as far as you can tell on your calendars? And we can use the reactions button at the bottom of the screen where there's a thumbs up or a yes. I guess a thumbs up would be appropriate here.
Mr. Chair, first Tuesday of odd numbered months.
I'm sorry, thank you very much. First Tuesday of odd numbered months, since the commission meets the third Thursday of odd numbered months. So I got a thumbs up from Gil, from Lindsay, from Gina, from Daniel, Mario, Eddie. Are you good? Your thumbs up, perfect. Douglas? You can go like that. You go like that. Russ? Are you still on, Russ? Russ, yep. James, yep. Matt? I think Matt's on.
Well,
Chris?
Matt's a guest, but
that's the guest. I'm so sorry. Chris? Does that work with you first Tuesday? Chris might be trying to find the button. Chris, if you don't mind going on camera, give us a thumbs up. And Kathy's good. This is pretty cool. I haven't tried this too much before. I think, Eric, is that everybody except, I think I have not seen a reaction from Chris.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we have 10 of the 15 members. We had 12 attending the meeting tonight, which was great. We did have 3 absences, so I can check in with the people absent from the meeting, but the 2 who left the meeting, Mariah was one. We know Tuesday's okay with her. And then Chris left. I'll check in with him as well.
Okay, I'd rather get everybody's input instead of just making a decision here. So I think what we've done is gotten everybody's thumbs up. Everybody's good with the first Tuesday of the month. And subject to Eric reaching out to the other members and checking in with them. If we get unanimity, then Eric or I will send out an email. that we are.
Hey,
gonna
Mark,
do.
Chris is
Yes.
okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine with it. I'm fine with that.
Great, Chris.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chris.
Would it be the same time?
Yeah, let's talk about the time next. So today, 5 to 7. Some in the past, we've started our meetings at 5:30 some of the time. Is there a preference for 5 2-hour meetings starting at 5 or 5:30?
I would prefer 5, Mr. Chair. I've got another Tuesday evening commitment. I mean, I'm not a member, but.
Oh, you're important.
We've always done it at 5. I think later just is more problematic. And as long as we're doing it by Zoom, 5 o'clock's probably not everyone's favorite either, but.
I thought we did
5
some
o'clock.
5:30s, but okay. So is everybody good with 5? Let's do thumbs up again. 5 to 7, thumbs up. Thumbs up. Make sure I got it right. James?
Yeah,
James
Jim, you're unmuted, so you can just chime in. Is that okay for you?
5, yeah, that's fine. Date and 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Great,
Okay.
thanks,
Yeah,
Jim.
5 o'clock is fine.
Chris 5. Okay. Kathy said good. Gil. Lindsay's good. Okay. So Eric, if you or I could just check in with the others that aren't here, I'm going to assume that's good.
I'll do that. And Mr. Chair, before you adjourn, can I just say really big welcome back to Todd Bruce. Probably you all don't know, but he was facing some real serious health challenges and he's come out great on the other end. And we missed him for a couple of meetings, but I'm awfully glad he's back. And Todd, we hope you're filling up better day by day and we're all rooting for you.
That's very good.
Yeah, I'm feeling great. Back to work in a couple weeks. So
awesome. Great.
Very good, Todd. Super. All right. I think that concludes our business. 7:07. Is there a motion to adjourn, or I'll just declare we're done. We're not doing Robert's rules.
I move to adjourn.
All right,
Thanks.
all right. Thank you all.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
all right, bye.